Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Montgomery County Council President Gabe Albornoz, and today is Tuesday, February 1st. Happy Lunar New Year, everyone. Before we get to the Council's general business, we have two proclamations that we will be presenting this morning. The first is by my colleague, Council Vice President Glass, recognizing Transit Equity Day. Council Vice President Glass, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And for the last number of years, a network of labor unions and transit organizations and environmental groups have celebrated Transit Equity Day to advocate for the equitable access to public transportation. And the origin of Transit Equity Day actually honors the birthday of Rosa Parks, who in 1955 refused to give up her seat in the front of a bus. And it was an act of civil disobedience against segregation. And her actions, we know, were part of the broader effort to establish civil rights for all Americans, and also happy Black History Month. But it is also a sign that everyone has equal rights and should have equal access to public transportation. We know that buses are a lifeline for tens of thousands of our residents here in Montgomery County and across the region. And that is especially true for our front-facing essential workers who often experience lower rate of car ownership. Because if you step into any one of the Montgomery County ride-on buses, you'll see a grandmother holding her grandchild's hand. You'll see folks listening to podcasts, as I often do. You'll see students going to and from Montgomery College, and you'll see people traveling to get to their job. And these are just a few of the moments that make up some of the 22 million ride-on trips that occur every single year here in Montgomery County. And the pandemic has highlighted the inequities that we knew already existed in our community, and they've stressed the transit systems throughout the region and the country. And while many of us have had the option to work from home, there are a lot of our neighbors who didn't have that option, and they've risked exposure for themselves and their family members having to get to work because they had no other options. And with the majority of our ride-on users having a household income of just $35,000 a year compared to the household median income of nearly $108,000 a year, our roadways have become one of the clearest examples of the economic disparities that exist within our own community. And in a moment, I'll introduce you to Sanjita so he can share his story with everyone, but I'd like to welcome my T&E colleagues to join me in this proclamation and say a few words. I think I saw Chair Hucker is here. I'm not sure if Councilmember Reamer is, but Chair Hucker, I turn it over to you to make a few comments.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Glass, and great to meet you, Sanjata. I am really glad that you initiated this, Councilmember Glass. I'm proud to help you present Transit Equity Day. I've been so personally inspired by Rosa Parks and her work, and I think she's associated, so much with civil rights. But I think it's easy to forget how the message, the choice of venue for the struggle that she initiated, and she initiated with so many civil rights organizations when she initiated the Montgomery bus boycott. We have come a long way in Montgomery County in ensuring equitable access to transit for our riders, but we really have to continue to be inspired by her leadership and continue her fight to improve our systems because we have a ways to go. As you all know, we set up the first BRT system in the county, the Flash Bus, and funded that and accelerated the funding for it. I'm glad it's entirely in my district on the east side of the county where it was most needed, where so many of our riders that are entirely dependent on transit live. But I'm proud that this committee and then this council has continued to improve the Flash Bus and insist on making it in a dedicated lane and pushing for electric buses in the future as well. So while we're happy that it's serving the residents that needed it, we're continuing to push and fund improvements in it to give residents the very first class transit opportunities that we promised them and they deserve. So again, really I don't want us to, it's easy to lose sight with all the decisions we make of the end goal. And this is a great reminder of what we're all pushing for, that we work on in our committee every single week. And I'm grateful to you, Councilmember Glass, for pushing this forward.
Well, thank you, Chair Hucker, for highlighting a lot of the work that has been taking place and a lot of the work that we've done over the last 3 to 4 years under your leadership as T&E Chair. And another key member of that T&E committee, Councilmember Reamer, also Chair of the Fed Committee, working hand in hand with transportation equity.
Morning. Thank you so much, Councilmember Glass. Really appreciate your bringing us together to emphasize transit equity. Personally, for me, public transportation is like public education and public health. And, it's a critical institution that only government can do. And the core objective is independence and dignity and social justice. And a lot of times in transportation, we get kind of in a mode of thinking it's about almost an engineering issue. How do you move people around? And of course, it is that, but that's not really what it's about. What it's about is ensuring that people can live the lives, that they can live their lives, they can fulfill their potential, that they can provide for their families, and kids can get around, and seniors can be independent. And it's just about providing the opportunity for people to live with dignity and with freedom. And that's what makes it worthwhile. That's what makes this issue matter so much to me. So I'm glad to be here today to join you in commemorating this.
Well, thank you both to my colleagues and partners in this work. And now I'm really excited to introduce Sunjata to everybody. Suma. Sunjata is an MCPS graduate from Paint Branch High School and an engineering student at Rensselaer Polytech Institute and a proud Burtonsville resident on the north end of that flash bus line that Chair Hucker was referring to. And each morning, Sunjata takes either the C8 or the C2 bus near Briggs Cheney to get to College Park. And that single 14-mile trip sometimes takes an hour or more. And so he knows what transit equity means, how important it is to him and his neighbors and to all of us in Montgomery County. And Sunjata, I welcome you to say a few words before we read the proclamation.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. Everything was true. And those words that you had really touched me about how it's about freedom and living with dignity, because that's so true. But yeah, I took some time to write down this little statement. Hi, my name is Sunjata Suma. I'm a longtime Montgomery County resident. I studied biomedical engineering, and luckily there are quite a few biomedical engineering companies or biomedical companies here in Montgomery County. Unfortunately, because I don't own a car, the commute from East County to those jobs was too long for me to reasonably consider. These jobs are way better than my current job, but these are the sacrifices, and I'm forced to forego these opportunities due to lack of transportation. So transit access is access to socioeconomic mobility. If you remember nothing else from what I say, remember that commute time is the single strongest factor determining the likelihood of escaping poverty, more so than incidents of crime or grade school test scores. The pandemic impacted our poorest communities the hardest, and they're the essential workers that we rely on every day. This is why, especially now, transit equity is crucial in our progress. So when we invest in transit, we're investing in poverty reduction and all the benefits that come with that. When we think of transit equity, we should think of all the opportunities we open up by providing equitable, reliable transit, opportunities for the youth, the poor, the disabled, the elderly, and the environmentally conscious, and everyone in between. And we can't think of it as something that only benefits those who use public transportation, because diverse transit options mean smoother traffic for everyone. Transit equity is a more sustainable goal. Aside from the well-publicized pollution from car emissions, there's the even simpler problem of limited space. Montgomery County is an attractive area with a growing population, and if everyone must rely on their own motor vehicle to participate in society, it will begin to put a strain on the space available for development. With ever expanding roadways and vast parking lots, transit equity gives us the option to create more human-focused and people-friendly spaces. Transit equity gives people the ability to live where it makes the most sense for them without sacrificing their quality of life or earning potential. Transit equity is the future. Thank you.
Well, that was incredible. You've touched on so many different things there, not only sharing your struggle and the work that we need to do, but I think we're all going to enlist you as we work to bring more biotech to East County, because you just articulated why that is also so incredibly important. So Sunjata, I know we all appreciate you being here, and thank you for articulating and advocating for transit equity. And so with that, my colleagues and I are now going to read the proclamation from the Montgomery County Council. Whereas Transit Equity Day, celebrated on February 4th, honors Rosa Parks as a civil rights trailblazer who used public transportation as a vehicle to highlight social inequities. Today, we come together to highlight the intersectionality of transportation equity, race, and social justice issues. And
whereas access to affordable and reliable public transportation is often a lifeline to a person's ability to move around our county, regardless of their social, physical, or economic barriers. And
whereas transportation equity also requires public transportation that is affordable, as it is often necessary to make multiple transfers to get to any given destination. The daily cost of public transportation can deter and limit a resident's ability to access community services, jobs, and amenities. And
whereas Montgomery County recognizes this cost burden, having approved fare-free ride-on service through July 2022, in order to ensure that all residents, especially our essential workers, have safe and reliable access to work, school, and shopping. And
whereas everyone deserves full access to safe, reliable, and accessible public transit that represents the needs of communities of color, economically disadvantaged people, people with disabilities, and other communities.
And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Montgomery County Council hereby celebrates and affirms Montgomery County's commitment to fair transit for all by declaring today Transit Equity Day. Signed by me, Council Vice President Evan Glass, and Council President Gabe Albornoz. Sunjata, thank you so much. And please stay in touch, and let's keep advocating on all those things you just talked about.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. You guys have a great day.
Sunjata, thank you.
Thanks, Sunjata.
Back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Vice President Glass. That was terrific. Sunjata, that was outstanding and provided a healthy dose of inspiration on a day that we all frankly need it. Now I want to welcome all of my colleagues to turn on their video screens as we celebrate another important milestone moment here in Montgomery County and across this country as we celebrate Lunar New Year. Our AAPI community contributes so much to our community economically, educationally, academically, culturally, and in every corner of our society. We are blessed and fortunate to have remarkable leaders in our AAPI community, many of which who are joining us this morning, as we celebrate the Year of the Tiger. The Lunar New Year reminds us that although we can never forget the lessons of the past, we must also focus on the promise of the future. And we all know that we have had an extraordinarily challenging 2 years, and in particular, our AAPI community, who under the previous presidential administration, and because of some of the absolutely toxic rhetoric that we saw in our community, saw stark rises in hate crimes and other extraordinary challenges that has led to extraordinary challenges in the community. But not surprisingly, our AAPI community has stepped up, and the symbol of the tiger represents bravery. It represents wisdom, it represents strength, all of which we could use a lot more from right now as we tackle the challenges before us, both big and small. But I'm confident that as a community, we will stay united and stay together as we tackle these many challenges. We are joined this morning by Maryland State Delegate and my former colleague in the Leggett administration, Lily Chi, Judge Chung Pak, Mr. Michael Lin, and Mr. Matthew Lee. We are also joined by Yi Shen, representing the executive branch and our Office of Community Partnerships, and we want to thank him for his continued leadership and his bridge building. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleagues to each make a few comments, and I'm going to go in the order of the screen that I see here after Council Vice President Glass. So we're going to start with Council Vice President Glass. We will then go on to Councilmember Katz, followed by Councilmember Hucker, then Councilmember Reamer, then Councilmember Navarro, and Councilmember Rice, and then Councilmember Friedson. So Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank all of our guests for being here today. You are true leaders in the AAPI community. And as has been said, this has been a rough year. But Montgomery County, with all of your help, has shown our commitment to making sure that everybody feels welcome and safe here. And we're going to continue doing that. And I'm just going to be brief in saying thank you. And I look forward to celebrating this Lunar New Year here virtually, but I look forward to seeing all of you and celebrating in person in the very near future. So thank you all for everything you do and for being here this morning.
Thank you, Council Vice President Glass. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and welcome to all of our good friends. I don't know how many years we have been together, literally together, at Lake Forest Mall for these celebrations. It is always, we went when it was questionable whether we should be there when it was snowing so hard, but the crowds were always terrific. And the Lake Forest has certainly changed over the years. Their spirit has not. I sincerely thank you. It's been mentioned this is the year of the tiger. And if we've ever needed a year of the tiger, it's this year. We've gone through so much. And you have been with us every step of the way. Each of you is a dear friend. We've called on each other many, many times. And I sincerely wish everyone the happiest and the healthiest of New Year's. And I did want to point out that Yi Shen, who was on the call, who used to be in my office, has actually given me some Chinese that I have said many times at the Lake Forest event. But I won't today. But we appreciate everything that he has done for Montgomery County as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many old friends here, and especially Delegate Chi and Michael and Matthew. The Year of the Tiger, is all about bravery and wisdom and strength, the great attributes of the tiger. And it's a fitting tribute to our community, which has battled through COVID and battled through this historic recession and emerged, I think, stronger and hopefully more equitable and more dedicated to our principles. I remember, Lily, learning from my high school Chinese teacher that the tiger is the king of the jungle, which is why so much Chinese art has a tiger with a wong on its forehead, symbolizing that it's the king. We know we're so proud of our diversity, four of the most top 10 most diverse communities in the nation. But what I believe is that what makes us so unique is not just our diversity, but the strength of our diversity. All of our communities participate in Montgomery County, making Montgomery County stronger. And our AAPI community in particular really helped us through the pandemic and the recession and put their lives and bodies and volunteer time and donations on the line to get us through the crises the last couple of years. We're really grateful for your contributions year in, year out, and wish everybody a Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Council President, for bringing us together, and thank you to our community leaders for participation. There has never been a more important time for us to lift up and celebrate our community and to strengthen the bonds between our county government and our Asian American community. And it is so deeply rooted here. We are really a national example of strength in so many different immigrant communities, but particularly it is our Asian communities that are on the front lines, providing services, helping us, as Councilmember Hucker said, through the crisis of COVID, but also in the labs and in all of the life sciences and NIH and organizations that are at the front line of tackling this global crisis. And we are so grateful. We are so lucky and fortunate to have such a strong Asian American community here. And I'm really glad to be part of just celebrating and highlighting and strengthening that bond in any way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. It's so good to see Delegate Chi here, Mr. Lin, such leaders, Matthew Lee, another extraordinary leader, and Yi Shen, who I think represents, the promise of young people who've always given back to the community. I think that it is very, very auspicious to talk about and celebrate the new year, because there's always hope every time we celebrate a new year. And I think that the year of the tiger, again, very auspicious in terms of what has just been described as qualities that we all still need. But I want to thank the AAPI community, because I think that you are such a representation of how diversity within a community really, truly can bring hope, build bridges, and work collaboratively to address not just the crises at hand, but also to strengthen the fabric of our community day in and day out. There is no way that we could have all collaboratively responded to this crisis unless we already had strength within our communities. And that is what all of you have demonstrated. And I think what all of our residents have demonstrated, and what makes this county so amazing. So happy, healthy, and prosperous New Year to everybody. And I so much look forward to the time where we can celebrate in person, because it is such a jolt of energy every time we could gather together and bring in this very important Lunar New Year.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Navarro. Next, we have Councilmember Rice, followed by Councilmember Friedson, and then Councilmember Jawando. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and happy Lunar New Year. I see Delegate Chi, I see Mr. Lee, I see Dr. Lin. It's so great to see you, and I see Yi Shen. It's so good to see you as well. This is, as you've heard from my colleagues, I'm not going to rehash everything that they've said, but we do need reunion. We do need rebirth. And Lunar New Year is just that. It's very interesting that in Chinese culture, I learned this when some of us traveled to China together, that it is the tiger that is king of the jungle, not lion. And so it is really fitting for us to make sure that we highlight just how important this is, taking the reins, taking charge, making sure that we lift ourselves out and lead. All of the traits that is there in a tiger. And so from that perspective, I hope that this year leads us into a great and bright future and lifts us out of the pandemic that we've been experiencing, all of the challenges and strife. And I certainly know that with the positive energy that goes along with Year of the Tiger, I hope that that positivity also leaks into our community that is hurting right now and needs that positive spirit that the tiger represents. So thank you very much, and happy Lunar New Year to each and every one of you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you so much. I too miss our in-person celebrations with all of you, and dim sum and soup dumplings with Yi Shen. I hope to do that again soon. And I just am so appreciative that we can celebrate this, even if it's virtually, to celebrate the Year of the Tiger, as colleagues have mentioned, symbolizing growth and recovery and forging ahead with strength and vitality. If ever we needed to come out of this pandemic in the Year of the Tiger, like a tiger, it's now. And it not only symbolizes the moment we're in, but it really symbolizes the community that we're here to celebrate, that we're so proud to have such strength in Montgomery County, a community that through the community-based organizations that you represent, through Delegate Chi's leadership, and so many of you here, so many local businesses, entrepreneurs, we're able to build on international connections when the supply chain was broken. We're able to lean in and help and provide PPE and so many other things that our county needed. When our county needed help, our AAPI community stepped up, and didn't just step up for the AAPI community, stepped up for the entire county. And we're so grateful to have such a strong AAPI community. In many ways, if Maryland is America in miniature, Montgomery County is the world in miniature. And there is no better example of that than the strength and success of our AAPI community. So happy Lunar New Year. Here's to coming out like a tiger in the year of the tiger of this pandemic, and to a healthy and prosperous year ahead to all of us. Thank you so much, and happy Lunar New Year.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Happy Lunar New Year to all of my great friends that are on the Zoom, and the literally, probably millions you get watching at home that are celebrating as well. It's an exciting day, and I am just so thankful, as my colleagues have said, for you, Delegate Chi, and Michael, and Matthew, and Shen, of course, all of you guys, and so many others who aren't here, obviously State Senator Susan Lee, and just the robust community we have, Chinese community that we have here, and Asian community writ large. One of my favorite memories of the pandemic, and I've been trying to do this lately because we need to have good memories in the pandemic, because in a lot of ways, it showed us a lot of adversity, but it also showed us a lot of coming together. And as is mentioned, not only the direct community service that your community has provided, but in May, and we all did these types of events, but I was able to stand in solidarity at the National Mall for a rally against Asian American hate. And I think that this community has hardened our resolve to fight discrimination in all of its forms. And because it's not only wrong, it keeps us from achieving our full potential. And I think we've made strides in recognizing that collective struggle and fight across all communities. And so I continue to do that. I know you all continue to do that. And I appreciate all the work that you've done throughout the pandemic and before in our community, and that you'll continue to do. So happy Lunar New Year. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully in person soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said, colleagues. As you can see, we stand with you in every way that we can as a council and as a community. Delegate Chi, I want to turn it over to you to say a few words.
Good morning. Thank you, Council President Albanaz and Council Vice President Glass, for your strong leadership. I'm Delegate Lily Chi, and happy Lunar New Year and happy Year of the Tiger to all my colleagues and all the friends watching this video. This is a joyous moment, and I wish everyone a prosperous, healthy, strong, and a roaring Year of the Tiger. I am so proud to be part of, to call Montgomery County home, partly because, and I would say, it's a very strong, important reason for me to point out that we can disagree with the county council on some policies, but you cannot dispute the fact that we have very strong county leadership who believes in inclusiveness. And in every way, in everything we do in our government operations and in our public policies. This is why I'm so proud to call Montgomery County home. And this is why, and it's no coincidence, that our Asian American community has grown by leaps and bounds over the past decade, ever since Montgomery County became a majority minority county. In fact, we are now at 15% of the county population. So part of it is because we have such inclusive and a diverse leadership in Montgomery County that really believes in the strength of all of us coming together. So I want to thank all of you for what you do. Excuse me, something's bothering me in my throat. And I am also proud that I was Montgomery County's Asian American liaison when I when I stepped up to the calling to say, with such diverse Asian American community, we want to make sure the government has cultural competency and language access programs in place to serve our very diverse and faster growing Asian American community. So I was very proud to be able to put in my service for like a decade in Montgomery County, working hand in hand with many of the community leaders on this call as well. And I want to say that 2022 is an election year and is a very important election year. And I see my election as a reflection of our community's growth and maturity over the years. And I know there will be more Asian Americans running for office. We already know some of them are coming out to run for offices. And I hope we will encourage and support them. But more importantly, we all need to register and vote and turn out and support candidates that support our communities, because when we vote, our voices matter. So thank you all again for paying tribute to our community's most important cultural holiday, and Happy Lunar New Year.
Thank you so much, Delegate Chi. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Michael Lin and then Mr. Lee, and then we will read the proclamation. Mr. Lin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, members of the council, and my friends. Happy Lunar New Year's. Yes, it is the year of the tiger, and it will be a good year for sure. But we do have to remind ourselves that this is a midterm election year, and we just have to come out strong. Another more exciting reminder is that Winter Olympics is starting in a few days, and the US, as usual, has a very strong team. In fact, we're expecting a few goals, and among them are a few Asian Americans. So we're going to be very excited watching the Winter Olympic, and hope you enjoyed it and have a very good year. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak a few words.
Thank you so much. Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I just want to thank you and Happy Lunar New Year. I'm sure that all 9 council members have always been champion of our AAPI communities, and I've always thankful and appreciate it. And I know we have just like Council that Hooker says, Council Rima says, we are the national example, and we have a Senator Susan Lee, we have a state, Delegate Lily Chi, and we have a David Moon. So in the Montgomery County, we really have the strong, presence of AAPI community, and also Ishan has been, helping our AAPI community and connecting each other with the council and county executive. So he's been doing a great job. And I don't know what to say to all the 9 council members. You've been supporting us so much, but we still needed additional support for not all the AAPI communities not doing well. So we need to go after some disadvantaged or some of the immigrant communities or senior communities. They need your support. So I just want to thank you so much, and then Happy Lunar New Year.
Thank you so much. And I know you all, the county executive will be doing his own event later this week. We look forward to hearing more about that later, but I'm now going to go ahead and read the proclamation. And this is a proclamation of the Montgomery County Council on behalf of all of my colleagues. Whereas the Asian American community represents more than 15% of the population in Montgomery County. And whereas the Asian Americans enhance the quality of life of Montgomery County through their impact and contributions in every aspect of our society. And whereas the Lunar New Year represents a time of renewal, celebration, is a source of pride of our country's Asian American community, including the Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese American communities. And whereas Asian Americans have seen an increase in racism, harassment, and hate crimes, and recognizes that Montgomery County celebrates and embraces our collective culture and a belief that the Lunar New Year is an opportunity to share and learn about our Asian American communities. And whereas February 1st, 2022 marks the beginning of the Lunar New Year, which according to the Chinese zodiac will be celebrated as the Year of the Tiger, which symbolizes recovery, growth, and forging ahead with vigor and vitality towards success and prosperity. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby acknowledges Lunar New Year in Montgomery County and recognizes the contributions of our Asian American community, that our Asian American community makes to our community, presented on this first day of February in the year 2022, signed by myself as council president. Thank you all so much. We hope you have a wonderful day and month, and we look forward to celebrating again together in the very near future. So with that, colleagues, we now move on to our general business this morning. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, good morning, Mr. President and council members. There's one announcement. The public hearings on the FY23 capital budget and capital improvements program will be held on Tuesday, February 8th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. and Wednesday, February 9th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m. The council has not received any petitions today, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. So the clerk has distributed the minutes for approval from December 7th, 14th, as well as January's 4th, 10th, and 11th. And are there any changes that colleagues would like to see made? Hearing no changes, those minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the council will now once again sit as the Board of Health, and we will receive an update from Dr. Bridgers, Dr. Kroll, and Dr. Stoddard, as well as Mr. Sean O'Donnell, who will talk about where things stand currently with our fight against the COVID virus. And we also are going to be joined this morning by our colleagues in Montgomery County Public Schools, who will be providing an update as well. So if I could ask everyone to turn on their screens, and we will first begin by turning it over to Dr. Bridgers and the public health team, and then we will ask our colleagues in the school system to make a brief presentation as well. We'll then go to questions and answers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Bridgers.
Good morning, Council President Albornoz, Council Vice President Glass, and to all assembled this morning as a council sitting as a Board of Health. I will start my video now because my properties were disabled, but now they are enabled. Happy Lunar New Year to all who celebrate the Year of the Tiger. Happy Black History Month to all who celebrate Black History Month. I just quickly want to just touch on a note that as I'm glancing down and looking at my notes, as I often do on the Council Board of Health, I am paying attention and taking copious notes. So I received some unfair and unkind messages yesterday that last week that alluded to the fact that I wasn't giving my undivided attention to such. So I just wanted to set the record straight that I am taking notes, and I will use often those notes as action items or follow-up items with our public health team or in discussions with our community partners. A couple items before Mr. O'Donnell gives us a crosswalk of the Pulse report. We had a very engaging conversation last week with our early child care providers. We've responded to some questions and have provided additional follow-up and answer to those questions. Over the weekend, CDC yet again updated their guidance regarding early childhood care, as well as for those providers. And when we meet with our Public Health Advisory Committee team members on Thursday, we will revisit those interim guidance to assess if and when it's time to move from a 10-day isolation period to a 5-day isolation period, which we can anticipate. But as we've done before with all of our policies, we've met with our medical team, our epidemiologists, our research scientists to determine the best practice and way forward. We also continue to work with our HHS IT team and our TEBS to develop an isolation and quarantine tool where individuals will be able to determine using this tool when their actual quarantine or isolation period will begin. And there were some questions last week after the Board of Health and during our child care provider town hall, when does an actual isolation or quarantine period begin? Dr. Kroll did some additional research, and we identified a tool that we could replicate and have for public use. So we're working on that, and that should be forthcoming maybe later this week. Need to follow up with our IT and TAPS partner. We continue to prepare for our under 5-year-old vaccination. Possible locations will continue to be based on our equity framework, and those hubs that are geographically located in the county, large child care providers will also be considered, as we've previously done in similar manners with our MCPS partners and our independent school partners. We encourage parents to begin to consult with their pediatricians or their primary care providers regarding the best vaccination strategy for their child or children. We estimate, based on census tract data, that there are about 59,000 children under age 5 who will fall into this cohort. As I indicated during the last Board of Health meeting, we have been preparing, and as we've done with all of our vaccination strategies, we will be prepared once it is approved by CDC's ACIP, and then begin the vaccination upon approval. Lastly, we will continue to assess tomorrow's Groundhog Day, but metaphorically, Groundhog Day is set as getting stuck in the current situation. Well, quite frankly, it's time to move from this current situation, and we've had conversations about moving from a pandemic to an endemic state. So Drs. Kroll, Stoddard, our community partner and teams will continue those conversations and to look at those metrics and practices that will move us forward. For example, census data, hospitalization data, mortality rates that will be used or could be used for future responses to variants and or surges. We've gone through 4 or 5 waves and surges, and next month will be 2 years. So we are looking at how we can move and have those better practices in place. Lastly, we encourage all those individuals who have access or have limited access to mobility and who are immunocompromised to use our, if transportation is available, to use our drive-through Montgomery County Germantown site. The site is open from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Sunday. This is a vehicle for those individuals who may not want to come inside or into a physical site, but be able to use that as an ease of access to not only get testing, but also may have some rapid test kits available through this point of access as well. I'll stop there with those opening remarks and turn it over to Mr. O'Donnell to walk us through the Pulse report.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers. Well, I appreciate that today is a day where we're bringing mostly good news to the council. We've been seeing our trends in cases and positivity rate go in the right direction. We're currently at 268 cases per 100,000 over a 7-day period. That's continuing to trend down. And our positivity rate is now down to 5.38%. This is all good news. This is likely a reflection of the lowering transmission of Omicron in our community. This may also be somewhat of a reflection with more people doing rapid tests. And again, we're just reminding folks, we want them to report their positive rapid tests through the county portal, since those tests are not being collected by a lab the way PCR tests are being collected. On the front of hospitalizations, it is more good news as well. Our overall hospitalizations have now gone down to 281 individuals with a COVID diagnosis in our hospitals. And that includes a decrease down to about 50 who are in the ICU wards across the county. We still have about 69 patients who are stabilized at the alternate care site and 18.3% of our hospital beds in the community are occupied by COVID diagnoses. That's still considered a high level, but these are definitely trending in the right direction. Just wanted to share some recent data that the CDC has released, looking at cases and deaths by vaccination status. First, we're on the left, we have our cases based on vaccination status, and you can see that there's a four times greater risk for testing positive for COVID-19 if you are unvaccinated versus fully vaccinated. And when you look at the death rates, it's even more profound. There's a 15 times greater risk of dying from COVID if you are unvaccinated versus being fully vaccinated. Now, these tables don't include boosters here, and the death data does only go to the early December before Omicron really hit us, and that is because of the trailing period of time to truly get that data. It takes a few weeks. But this is fairly profound information about becoming at least fully vaccinated versus unvaccinated in being protected against COVID. To go a step further and look at the levels of individuals who are boosted, you see that rates go even further northward, where we said you had a 4 times greater risk if you were unvaccinated from vaccinated. If you're boosted, that risk drops even further. So you have a 13 times greater risk if you're unvaccinated versus boosted, just for getting COVID. And that runs through the end of December, which includes a lot of time during the Omicron phase. Your risk of death is 68 times greater if you're unvaccinated versus if you're boosted. Again, we wanted to share this. The CDC updates these numbers every month. And this is very, very compelling. I know in many of these testimonies of looking at different protective measures that have impacts on the community, there are people saying vaccinations don't protect you from COVID. That could not be more clearly not true. Looking at our vaccination totals over time, we are, I think we mentioned this last week, that there is from time to time slight changes in how the CDC counts these numbers. But we, as of last week, we were at 84% of our total population with 2 doses once CDC recalculated how they add in vaccination numbers from federal facilities and DoD facilities, both of which are largely present within our county. But we are still trending in the right direction there. And our 5 to 11-year-old, those numbers continue to go up. We're likely to see in the next few days our first dose vaccinations go above 70% with that group, and our fully vaccinated is now above 50%. I want to, in particular, share our appreciation with MCPS and allowing us to come through with the principals who have allowed us to come into their schools. We've now been to all of the Title I schools at least twice, in many cases, many more times than that. And we do appreciate the principals and their staff accommodating us coming in. I want to thank Ms. Stephanie Izzard for coordinating this on our behalf, making it very easy for the public health teams and our partners to come into these schools and do the vaccinations. This is truly making a difference, and we really appreciate all their efforts to accommodate us. And then finally, I just want to give you all an update on the rapid test distributions. We now have received more than 1 million of these tests. These numbers get updated pretty much daily as new shipments come in. Often we have very limited notice of when those shipments are coming in, but we have been working with Dr. Stoddard and our partners in DGS and the libraries and OEMHS to make sure we can get these out as quickly as possible. We know that we've distributed more than 945,000 of the tests. More than 572,000 kits have been distributed through 3 weeks. Those numbers don't include yesterday's distributions, but more than 572,000 test kits, which means more than 1 million tests, since there's two tests in each kit. More than 505,000 masks have also been distributed at the libraries. Additionally, 290,000 rapid test kits have gone to MCPS to assist them in rapid testing with the schools. And more than 62,000, almost 63,000 test kits and 108,000 masks have gone out to childcare, private schools, and other community nonprofits. Many of those community nonprofits focusing on populations with mobility or disability challenges, which make it difficult to come to one of the libraries. Again, we're just still reminding folks, we do need you to report your positive test results through the portal if you do a rapid test. Those were the updates I have now, and I'd like to turn it back over to my public health colleagues or Dr. Stoddard.
I only have a couple additional comments. I'm not sure if Dr. Kroll has any comments. First off, I want to congratulate Novavax for their submission of their emergency use authorization to the FDA. They will actually be the first protein-based vaccination to seek approval. Obviously, that may be helpful in some people are concerned about the mRNA technology, and they have been hesitant to get vaccinated to this point because of that. Obviously, if Novavax receives its approval, that would obviously offer them an alternative to a more a vaccine methodology of development that has a longer history. And so if that may be important to some, obviously it's great news for a local company that has done great work. And there are a lot of people worldwide who still need to be vaccinated. So any addition to that market is an important one. Moderna did receive its full FDA approval, so it's no longer operating under an emergency use authorization, which is also good news additionally. We've heard varying reports about FDA potentially approving the Pfizer vaccine for under 5-year-olds. You will see in those discussions, there's a back and forth about what will actually be approved if it's approved over the next month. They're currently in a trial, as is Moderna, for a third dose of the series. Candidly, I think the vaccine should have, I think much of the data supports that the vaccine should have always been considered a 3-dose vaccine, but obviously for adults in the rush to get it out there on the market, provide some protection, there was a 2-dose approval. I think that's likely to be the same case with the Pfizer vaccine. I think for those people concerned about, hearing it doesn't provide as much immune response with 2 doses as you would want, I think that is not necessarily that surprising given what we know about the booster shot for adults. I would also say, I think that, if you understand the basics of how vaccination generally work, which is show your body a portion of a pathogen and allow your body to mount immune response against that part of the pathogen. Understanding that getting started on your series makes a whole lot of sense, even if you know that you're going to have a 3-shot series that's going to have to take several months to complete. So I genuinely think that we'll see what the FDA does, but I think on the premise that you approve a 2-dose vaccine with the knowledge that a 3rd dose will likely be necessary, I think that's the same thing that was done with the original mRNA vaccines, and I think that's likely or potentially what we may see in this case. Mr. O'Donnell went over some of the numbers with the test kits. A couple of other updates. I think we did send another shipment to MCPS on Friday or yesterday. So they are up to 340,000 test kits. That means last week we did send them over 100,000 test kits, just them specifically. We've got another allocation going out to childcare providers this week. They'll be doing a second round of distribution. After the first round, we did more than 800 centers that were distributed to. Continue to work with our nonprofits and health-based community partners to do distributions that serve homebound residents, those with disabilities, those in higher at-risk communities. And so those efforts will continue, obviously, even as we parallel them along with our library-based distribution. We are also working with some different partners on getting the masks out further. So we've had some outreach from some of our farmers markets, for example, as a mechanism to distribute masks, and we'll be partnering with them to do that as well. So those are, I think, all of the things I wanted to cover. And I don't know if Dr. Kroll has any comments before we take questions.
I don't see Dr. Kroll on, so why don't we move on to our colleagues in MCPS. Mr. DeAndrea, if you can give an overview and presentation on where things currently stand with our school system, and then after that, we'll begin Q&A, colleagues. Mr. DeAndrea.
Good morning, President Albornoz and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm joined by Heather Dublinsky and Stephanie Izzard, and I just want to begin by echoing what Mr. O'Donnell said a few moments ago, just to thank DHHS for their partnership, and from the MCPS side, huge thanks to Stephanie Izzard and Sean O'Donnell for all of their hard work to be able to stand up all of the clinics throughout the county, because that's been a tremendous effort that has worked remarkably well. And so we're very grateful to the partnership with DHHS. We were asked today to provide a brief update on where we are with our COVID-19 case reports, as well as some of the operational data points that have been subjects of interest in recent weeks. So we will provide some brief information there and then open it up to questions that you may have. So we want to start by giving an update on where we are with case reports. And as you saw just a few moments ago, and looking at the county data, our data also mirrors that, thankfully. There's been a very significant decrease in cases since classes resumed right after winter break on January 5th. We had a high of 2,833 cases reported on one day, that first day back from winter break. And then that has gone all the way down to just this past weekend. There were only 37 cases reported on Saturday. And then you can see when we look at 10-day case numbers, there was a dramatic decline as well from the first 10 days since students returned to school on January 5th to these most recent 10 days, January 22nd to January 31st. And we look at that from a graphical perspective, you can see here, clearly there were significant spikes early in the month. And when you see the lower numbers, especially like January 8th and 9th, again, these are case reports based on when families report the information to us. So in many cases, those numbers end up being lower on the weekends and then higher during the week, as you can see those first 2 weeks in January. But the great news is, despite those initial spikes, you can see that for the past 10 days, numbers have been consistently much lower than they were back at the beginning of January, which has been, very positive on so many levels. And again, we really appreciate the partnership with DHHS as we work together to figure out the best way to address, obviously, the significant challenges that the increase in cases in December and January brought to us. Along those lines, we wanted to take a moment to also look at one operational piece of data that has also been something that we've gotten a lot of questions about, and that is looking at our information regarding substitute teacher requests, because we know back at the beginning of January in particular, this was a significant challenge for us. So let me explain to you what you see on the screen here in front of you. What you're looking at is the number of substitute teacher requests for each school day in January, and each bar represents the total number of requests. So on the left side of the screen, for example, January 5th, there were just over 1,600 total substitute requests for the entire system. In blue, you see those substitute teacher requests that were filled by substitute teachers. And in orange, you see the substitute teacher requests that were not filled, meaning that other staff members had to cover those classes. And you can see, as I know we had discussed previously, at the beginning of January, this was a very significant challenge because we experienced a higher percentage of unfilled substitute teacher requests than we all can ever remember in the past. If you look over the course of the month, you'll see that the total number of substitute teacher requests has declined significantly to where we are this most recent week, looking at January 31st, to where it's about half of what it was at the beginning of the month. And the percentage of the substitute teacher requests that are filled by substitute teachers is much higher than it was at the beginning of the month. At the beginning of the month, it was right around 25%, and now it's significantly over 50%. Obviously, our goal would be that each bar is completely blue, and our human resources office is working very diligently to increase the number of substitute teachers available. And I know that when Dr. McKnight was here a couple of weeks ago, she shared about the efforts that have gone into the work with our Teachers Union, Montgomery County Education Association, to increase pay for substitute teachers and also provide other incentives, which that is definitely helping as well. And we will continue those efforts moving forward. I also wanted to take a moment to touch base on one other operational subject of interest, and that is the 10-day virtual experience. So as Dr. McKnight shared when she was here a couple of weeks ago, we have developed a process where we review the data for all of our schools, looking at a variety of operational data points as well as our COVID-19 case rates. And then based on the schools that have the highest numbers in those specific areas, a team is convened at the individual school, including staff representatives, including parent representatives, and including central office representatives and school administrators, to review all that data and then make a recommendation to the superintendent's cabinet about whether that school should transition to a period of virtual learning learning for 10 days. And so the first time going through that process was the third week of January. And at that time, there were 16 schools that transitioned to a 10-day virtual experience. It is important to note it is 10 calendar days, not 10 school days. So that does include the weekends. The following week, we then went through the process again, and we have 4 schools that transitioned to virtual learning starting yesterday, and we'll be in a period of virtual learning through next Wednesday, February 9th. In an effort to be responsive to the questions that community members have raised about when can we anticipate these sorts of announcements, we've now set up and communicated this through our regular weekly updates that we will be reviewing data on a weekly basis and then make sure that announcements are made by Friday each week, and that any transition to virtual learning will start on the following Monday, or if Monday is a holiday, then on the following Tuesday. Obviously, the numbers have declined significantly between the first week and the second week, and our goal is for all schools to be able to be in person full-time and not need to transition. But we recognize that this is a really important way to make sure that students are consistently receiving high levels of instruction in schools where operations in particular are notably impacted by a variety of operational factors such as teacher absences, unfilled substitute teacher requests, and other pieces related to that. One of those other factors that I will mention as well relates to unserved bus routes. We know that this was a challenge at the beginning of January as you look at our data in a variety of areas due to the increase in cases. I am happy to share that for the past week, we have had no unserved bus routes. So that means all bus routes have been running in the morning and the afternoon. As the COVID-19 case rates have gone down, we have had fewer numbers of bus drivers who have not been able to work. The last piece that we would like to touch base on is to provide an update on case investigation. Again, we are very appreciative of the partnership with DHHS to be able to change the way that we handle our case investigation processes, which will have a significant impact on the work of school administrators in particular. And Heather Dublinsky is going to give an overview of this change.
Thank you. Good morning, council and colleagues. I'm excited to share that in collaboration with the Department of Health, we have come up with a new way to support schools with COVID-19 case investigations when there are positive cases within our school buildings. Case investigation will no longer be the primary responsibilities of our school administrators and principals, and thanks to collaboration with the Department of Health, they have provided us with a number of contractors to support our schools with these efforts. Current contractors that were in our health rooms supporting rapid testing throughout the year, we've now expanded their capacity and trained them on COVID-19 case investigation, and they are able to support schools when there are cases that need to be investigated so that they can provide information to Department of Health to do thorough contact tracing. With this partnership with Department of Health between the MCPS case investigators and the DHHS case investigators, we have over 120 employees who are able to support our schools. And thankfully, with our decrease in cases, this is adequate support to provide all of our schools with the support they need. And again, we thank the Department of Health for their support and look forward to future collaboration during the pandemic.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Dublinsky. And with that being shared, President Albornoz, we will now turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeAndrea. So I do have colleagues that have raised their hands and would like to speak. But before I get to their questions, I just wanted to ask a general question. Dr. Stoddard, I appreciated you mentioning the ongoing efforts to especially reach our hard to reach communities, folks with disabilities or don't have access to the same levels of transportation to be able to access test kits and masks. What number should residents call if they can't make it to a library or one of the locations that has been set up?
Sure. I think Mr. O'Donnell may be able to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe you can call the HHS call center, which I believe is 240-777-2982. Or you can email C19vaccination@montgomerycountymd.gov, and we'll set you up with a partner who will be able to help you with delivery of kits.
Yeah, and we've also been we've been working with our partners, our state partners, who have set up the drive-through testing site at Montgomery College in Germantown. That's certainly accessible to those individuals with mobility impairments who can go through and get PCR testing. And we're working on an opportunity to work with them to distribute rapid tests and masks through that site as well.
And just to add to Dr. Stoddard and Mr. O'Donnell, if you call or contact 240-777-2982, 2982. Please leave a message. We will try to respond within 24 hours. We have call center operators there, and I know it can be frustrating if you contact the call center and not receive a live voice. We are responding, and we will respond if you don't get a live voice or return phone call. I also invite you to follow up with an email, and we will respond accordingly to both the email and the call center number. Thank you.
Thank you. So just logistically here, we're doing well on time, colleagues. We have until 11:30 before the next item on the agenda, so we do not have to institute the 5-minute rule. Just request that my colleagues keep your questions tight if possible, so that other colleagues can ask questions as well. But we've got Councilmember Rice, followed by Councilmember Friedson, then Councilmember Reamer, and then Councilmember Navarro, who have chimed in so far. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you to all of you for the update. It does seem very positive and that things are headed in the right direction. And so that is thankful, as we were just talking about Lunar New Year and talking about the Year of the Tiger and hope and promise and recovery and all of those kinds of things. It certainly is representative. And so we're very happy to hear that. I did just want to do a public service announcement on a couple different things. And one of those is about transportation, especially when it comes to getting vaccinations, and remind folks that with our private rideshare providers like Uber and Lyft, who still are providing free transportation. When you mentioned, Mr. O'Donnell, about folks that are experiencing mobility issues, there is also still provided by private providers out there free transportation to get vaccinated. And so from that perspective, I just wanted to make sure that folks are aware, so that those folks who don't have their own vehicles and are mobility challenged can still get to those vaccine sites to make sure that they're availing themselves of something great that our folks in the private community are stepping up and meeting the needs. So we really appreciate that. Dr. Stoddard, I did want to ask you about what it is that we're seeing in terms of the numbers, and Mr. O'Donnell kind of reflected on that in terms of the staggering differences in percentages between those that are vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And between you and Dr. Bridgers, I'm just curious as to how far county government is going to go to make sure that folks understand how important it is to get vaccinated. I mean, it's very clear from those numbers that both from a death perspective as well as from a serious health implication perspective, that those who are vaccinated fare so much better. Is that going to translate into additional policy recommendations from the county executive and from county government when it comes to ensuring that as we have the data that's before us that says that vaccinated folks are less likely to contract COVID and get serious repercussions from it, or to die from it? So from that perspective, with those kinds of stark numbers, I would assume that there'd be a full court press for the greater good of our community as a whole to make sure that everyone gets vaccinated.
Yeah, so right now I know we have at least a $300,000 allocation for an ad buy to really push boosters, particularly because I think we've done very well, as we all know, in getting those first 2 doses. We've done less well, though improving in the booster shot arena. So I think we've got an allocation from a previous COVID-related grant that we're going to push a new push on boosters, particularly not just in light of this data, but obviously this data is a great part of that. Pushed, and we're going to use the same methodology that we used in earlier parts that led to such a robust 2-dose vaccination, focusing on our diverse communities, focusing on multiple languages, focusing on different media types to reach younger people. Obviously, this is very similar to what we were very successful with earlier, using the Abuelina and other things like that. I think we're going to be looking to do a similar push. It's already underway. It's been underway, and we'll be able to provide some additional feedback on exactly what those elements are. But yes, we are definitely doubling down on, in the new year, pushing people to get vaccinated and get boosted, particularly because we know that we were successful in so many ways earlier on in the pandemic getting people vaccinated. Now we just need to remind people that this is an ongoing process as opposed to a one or two and done.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Oh, Dr. Bridgers. please.
Sure, Councilmember Rice, just to add to Dr. Stoddard. So as he indicated, as far as having a more forceful campaign to encourage folks to get their booster shots, we're also looking at and doing a deeper dive and analysis to look at those deaths, to see where they are. We have weekly conversations with our hospital nexus partners to look at those cohort of individuals who are in the intensive care unit and look at examining their vaccination status and using hospital data to determine as part of that campaign if there is any hesitancy or apathy or just why they're in the hospital. We're also, as part of our equity framework, we use a zip code analysis, but now it's time to take a deeper dive and pare that down even further to look at census tract data to see where folks are, to continue to work diligently with our community partners, our minority health initiative partners to get those vaccines and get those the messages deeper in the community using the census tract, having more mobility. We've used mobile vaccine strategies and support from the state, but channeling that support in a more targeted effort. And so we're looking at that now, again, moving from a pandemic state to an endemic state to get that 16 or 17% of the population that's still unvaccinated and having an aggressive campaign in our under 5-year-olds who are still unvaccinated.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Bridgerson. It's perfect tee up for my next question for you, sir, which is that we saw with the original strain and with Delta variant that our communities of color were hardest hit. Is that the same of Omicron?
And so in looking at some of the data, it follows suit with not only Omicron, but the previous 13 or 14 strains. And we need to do more in a concerted effort in our communities that have been hardest hit, and working with our African American health program and partnership EC to look at targeted strategies. Mr. O'Donnell has the numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but the answer to your question is simply yes.
Okay, I think that's important for a later discussion that we're going to have, understanding that, again, unfortunately, some of the health challenges that we continue to see in our communities of color are ones that have led to more susceptibility when it comes to these COVID variants that have wreaked havoc throughout our community. And so certainly ones in which we need to do everything we can to ensure that our folks are healthy and resilient so that they can also benefit from some of the other things beyond the vaccinations themselves that help folks to recover quicker and to be more resistant to these various variants that are going through our communities. My last question is for Mr. DeAndrea. Mr. DeAndrea, we asked the state when it came to opt-out testing, something in which we've heard from various jurisdictions across the nation that have experimented with and trying to really figure out ways in which we can get opt-out testing. We heard from the state that seemed agnostic in terms of whether or not we as a local jurisdiction could enact opt-out testing. What does the school system feel about that response that they've heard from the state at this point?
Thank you very much for that question, Councilmember Rice. We know there's been a lot of discussion about opt-in versus opt-out testing. And with that updated information from the state, which again is different than what was provided by the state last summer when the testing programs were initially released, we have been working very closely with our general counsel, and our general counsel is working very closely with county attorneys to figure out the next steps to be able to move in that direction, because we recognize that being able to implement an opt-out testing program would be a significant step in the right direction as one of our mitigation measures to be able to keep schools safe. So I appreciate you bringing that up. We anticipate that we will have an update for the council on that in the very near future.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's exciting news. So really appreciate that. And with that, Mr. President, I turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. First of all, that was very positive news. So glad to hear about that. Look forward to hearing sooner rather than later, and glad we're moving in that direction. I think it would be a significant positive for the school system and for the community. the news here is really good. So I just want to point out it was a really awful January for everybody. And whether it's the schools or the community, things are looking better. And so the year of the Tiger, I hope, is an impetus to moving to a much better position for all of us. And so I just wanted to note that, that there was a lot of positives amid a really challenging month, and appreciate everybody's hard work to try to navigate through that. I share the excitement about Novavax, and glad that was mentioned. I think that could be a real positive and definitely an indication of what's happening in our community, and how the solutions to many of these problems globally are happening right here in Montgomery County. And also really do appreciate the discussion, Dr. Bridgers, that you mentioned about determining how we go from pandemic to endemic. And I think that is the critical conversation now that we're through Omicron that we need to have, and appreciate the fact that you're having it. And I do think, Dr. Stoddard, as you discussed how we changed the way we viewed the initial thought process of more of a one and done vaccine, get it and move on back to normal, to how do we continue to have the type of dosage that we need to continue the protection that's required. The same is true of the endemic state. How do we learn to live with a virus that's going to be around for a while and is changing? And we're going to have to adapt to it, but have to figure out how we get to our way of life and educate kids and deal with all the equity challenges that we have in a reasonable way. Those aren't easy conversations, but we have to have them. So I appreciate the fact that you're discussing that. And lastly, I just appreciate the work on childcare and the childcare town hall that you hosted. And I just had a few follow-up questions from that, if you wouldn't mind. And I understand that the CDC is changing the guidelines quite frequently, including over the weekend. So it is a bit of a moving target, and certainly that makes it very difficult for you. It makes it even more difficult for providers and for families. I think we all recognize that. But the first question is, during the town hall, we've heard this before, it was clear that this is guidance and not a requirement, not a mandate, and that the definition of an outbreak that we've been trying to get through is 3 cases in one classroom or 5 cases in a facility. That has changed over the course of the conversation. If you could just explain and clarify that, because there's been a lot of confusion of whether the interim guidance that is provided is being required by the Department of Health, or whether it's a suggestion by the Department of Health, unless and until there's an outbreak, which is 3 cases in a classroom or 5 cases in a child care facility.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Friedson, for that. So with an outbreak, we look and we assess the data. Our team continues to compile that narrative. As on the town hall, I indicated those cases per month in November, December, and January. They continue to be recommendations. Once our team is notified of an outbreak, as you indicated, 3 or more, or in a larger setting, 5 or more in those congregate spaces, our CD&E, our communicable disease and epidemiology team, will begin their contact tracing, I should say, and investigation. So these are recommendations up until the point there is an outbreak, and our CD&E team is advised in collaboration with the Maryland Department of Health Epidemiology Department as well. And that's when we continue or begin our case investigation. At that particular point, the health officer will issue a health officer order, which would mandate that those individuals who either have been identified as a positive case, they isolate, or if there's an exposure, those individuals will quarantine based on those recommendations and or guidelines that are set forth by CDC or MSDE and MDH. So these are strong recommendations that child care providers should use as a means to gauge and mitigate and suppress any further transmission of any disease, communicable disease or virus. Now, again, as you indicated in your remarks, we will meet again with our public health advisory team, which are a cadre of doctors, epidemiologists, and researchers, to revisit the updates to those recommendations and to make the necessary changes for isolation, the isolation period. If you recall, when we had multiple surges or surges that were close together, we held a 14-day isolation period. We moved from 14 days to 10 days, and now we are considering, based on the current case counts, hospitalization, and other data that we use as primary, secondary, or tertiary indicators, from 10 to 5 days. And so we will make those recommendations and update our interim guidance again along those lines and accordingly. But specifically, your question around outbreaks are as such. So those recommendations would help mitigate and suppress those outbreaks. When it's in actuality an outbreak, then our team will step in and we'll make the necessary health officer orders to mitigate any further transmission of that outbreak.
I think the real confusion is, short of a health officer order, which I think is clear, you must follow a
Correct.
health officer order. It carries the weight of law. In the absence of that, I think the confusion that has continued throughout this process is whether or not a discussion with the health team is an order itself, in and of itself. And so, if that is the standard, at one point it was 2 or more cases in a facility, now it's 3 cases in one classroom or 5 cases in the facility. I think that needs to be made very clear to providers and to families and to the health team, because I think that there is a lot of confusion, and even in my office's communications with providers and things that have been forwarded to us, there is not necessarily consistency in what is being shared. And so I know things are moving quickly and changing rapidly, and there's a lot of things that are happening in real time, but I think it's really important that it be very clear and very consistent in terms of what the rules are, and the difference between what is a requirement and what is a recommendation that is being made. Related to that and the changes that you're making, some of the confusion lies in the fact that we are adopting different standards in the state and then the CDC. Could you just explain the rationale behind that, of why, from a public health perspective, you've not adopted the Maryland State Department of Health, or another standard, maybe the DC standard or the CDC standard directly?
Sure, thank you, Councilmember Friedson. Let me just back up to your previous question. I've made a note to ask our team, as we've done before in response to inquiries to your office, our FAQ, frequently asked questions, and our PowerPoint presentation to serve as not only a visual guide, but a narrative to help clear up some of those questions that we've previously done when there have been changes to the guidance. To your second question, in consultation with our public health advisory team, and with the increasing case count, the astronomically high increasing case counts during November and December, and even into January, it was a safer practice to have a more stringent isolation period, even prior to the CDC's and MSDE and MDH's update to their guidance. Clearly, for those who are unvaccinated, not only for children under 5 who are unvaccinated, but for those providers who may have become positive through community level transmission, as the data indicated, that was a period when we had almost the highest number of case counts and community level spread. So it was for those reasons, principally, that we wanted to have more stringent policies that moved away from CDC and MSDE. In addition to that, we also provided a means for those providers and or children to have rapid tests available. And so all of those came into variables based on our decision-making process. We've gone past that period, and we will revisit those decisions again this Thursday to make additional recommendations based on the data and access to rapid tests now. But it was for those previously mentioned reasons: high case counts, high community spread, high test positivity, high hospital bed utilization, both ICU and acute care, increased conversations with our hospitals regarding pediatric cases. We didn't see them, but we didn't want to have that happen in our community. So it was for those reasons that we enacted, or we recommended, I should say, more stringent policies.
Appreciate that. I just think anytime that we are adopting a standard that is different from the state, in particular CDC, or another regional counterpart, it's all the more important that we over communicate and that we be consistent, because it creates a lot of confusion. So I hope we can continue to work hard
Sure.
on that. I think the town hall was a step in the right direction, but I think more work can be done in that regard. Just final question, you mentioned earlier about the meeting on Thursday that you're going to have to determine interim guidance and whether or not the interim guidance will change, or whether there'll be new guidance that is issued. Is there a timeline following that Thursday discussion of when you would expect determination to be made, and when and how that would be communicated with providers and with families?
Sure. Thank you again, Councilmember Friedson, for that question. But going back to your previous question, all of the recommendations that we set forth were vetted with MSD and MDH prior to its release. Based on our conversations, we will have more frequent communication, because we know that's much needed in the community. So once we meet with our public health advisory team, we will meet with our early developmental learning team at HHS. We'll meet with our public health service team. So I can anticipate early next week, hopefully by the Board of Health meeting next Tuesday, if not then sometime during the week. But we want to make it as clear as possible. We want to make sure that there aren't any typographical errors or misunderstanding and interpretation of the guidance, and we want to make sure that it's clear. So once we put it out in the public domain, it's clear to all. So sometime early next week, I would say.
That's helpful. Appreciate it. Thanks again for all of your efforts, and I'll yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson. We've got next Councilmember Reamer, followed by Councilmember Navarro, then Councilmember Hucker, then Councilmember Jawando, and then Council Vice President Glass. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. All right. Councilmember Friedson asked some good questions about the isolation guidance. I'm glad to hear you're revisiting this. I think that our guidance, which is stricter than the state, stricter than the CDC, does have a lot of impacts on working families and has a lot of impacts on kids. So it's a difficult, balance, but I hope that you will align. Generally speaking, I am definitely feeling more optimistic about the spring. I mean, we're seeing the case numbers coming down. That is fantastic. It feels like, absent a new variant that comes along that is, changes everything, that we could be in for a good stretch here of low transmission and low risk, and just enjoy living. So it feels like the storm is passing. I really feel there is a general growing sense that our emergency measures are effective. But we should use them in emergencies and not all the time. And we need to plan for waves in the future and use emergency measures when we have them. But at the same time, recognize when we don't. And again, assuming we don't get another variant, on the one hand, it feels inevitable to me that we'll be back with another Omicron wave next winter. There's frankly no reason to think at this stage that we wouldn't. So we ought to start planning for that and thinking about big vaccination campaigns in the fall, because immunity wanes. I mean, that's the core of the issue, is whether you're vaccinated or whether you're infected, immunity wanes. And so we need all kids to be vaccinated to return to school. We need employees to be vaccinated. We need, we need community campaigns in anticipation of a winter, wave, just like we've had. And we need stockpiles. We need stockpiles of all the tools, the tests and the therapies and the masks and everything. And so if we can, proceed with that and execute on that, hopefully we can meet this next time more, with greater impact than this time. This was a wave that I think, frankly, nobody could have truly anticipated. Yeah, I guess not too much to say other than I wanted to share my general thinking, which is I think we're going to have a great spring. I think we're going to be able to, and we need to be able to, allow people to live their lives. And, especially kids, kids need to have a spring with sports and extracurriculars and, theater and play dates. We've got to, hopefully that's where families will be. They'll be ready for that. And hopefully the virus will have subsided enough that, anxiety will be reduced. But meanwhile, we will redouble our efforts, and, we've got to think about how we can do a better job meeting the impacts of this pandemic. The tension level, the pressure level in the community is so high. And school safety, I think, is one of the big consequences. We really do. I know we are all focused on how can we increase our investments and spend more effort on school safety campaigns, engaging students and families and faculty and employees in order to grapple with one of the significant consequences of the pandemic that we're having a real problem in school. So. Thanks for the chance to make some comments. Again, given that you're taking up the isolation guidance soon, I will be eager to see how that's going. And we'll review that again in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, first of all, it's clear that, we have to engage in a multi-level type of approach, so reacting very quickly and addressing the emergency. It's one thing that we all have been engaged in doing. And the other one is this notion of putting forth the scenarios, the protocols, the structures for how we will react in the future, or how will we position the county for an endemic state, understanding that variants can come at any time. And it's something that I know I've been very interested in and have talked about in previous meetings. So I, just have a couple of questions, but then would love, as things are beginning to settle, perhaps to have opportunities during these briefings to focus on those types of issues or strategies, just so that we can all begin to understand what is the approach and what it is that we have in place, what can we leverage, but also where are the gaps, and then be ready. So I guess it's just a formal request to Council President Albornoz and also the administration and MCPS to see if we can find a time to begin to talk about that as we're now beginning to see the cases go down, which is awesome. So first, I want to thank the team. I want to thank the HHS team, the leadership of Dr. Stoddard, Dr. Kroll, Dr. Bridgers, also MCPS, of course, Mr. O'Donnell as well, but MCPS as well, for really being very focused through a very difficult time. I think the distribution of the masks and the tests and everything that has been done to retool and adapt, needs to be applauded, because it's just never, ever easy to quickly move a very large institution, a very large operation to react very quickly and respond to something that is so unfamiliar. So yes, I understand that it has not been easy, and we have all had to deal with a lot of frustration, but it is important also to be grateful and recognize that this is definitely not your run-of-the-mill situation, and therefore, staff that has been working so hard and at times has been the target of such vitriol also deserves to be thanked for everything they have done up until now. So I wanted to ask about, again, and just, to begin to set that stage, when we use the term endemic, what exactly are we looking at vis-a-vis case numbers, or are there particular metrics where the public can begin to now think about this notion of an endemic approach to what has up until now, obviously, and continues to be a pandemic? And also, a lot of reports about Omicron BA.2, like, is that something we're tracking? How do we incorporate that in this conversation about, or this, process of thinking about a county that goes from pandemic to endemic response? So just those two pieces. So as we're trying to now look at the flicker at the end of the tunnel, how would we know that we are reaching endemic, and are we tracking this Omicron BA.2 variant?
So, Dr. Stoddard, you want to start? I can jump in.
You go first this time. Go first.
Okay. Thank you, Council Member Navarro, for your question. So you talked about multiple levels and looking at an endemic, where we are, as Dr. Stoddard indicated before, looking at how we continue to function. And we know there may be variants on the horizon. You mentioned the BA subvariant, 2 subvariant. And so how do we monitor those hospitalization rates, those metrics, those reinfection rates? And so in listening to you, I just jotted down a couple of points that Dr. Stoddard and others, our community partners, will continue to access. And I'll just run down that list if you allow me. Vaccination, testing, reinfection rate, policies regarding masking, health equity, access to care, parks and recreation, summer programs, seasonal events, employee work status, impact on government, schools, private and public sector. So those are just some points that we will, and we need to talk about how it impacts all of those spaces that I just enumerated, with council sitting as a Board of Health, with our community partners, with our MCPS partners, with our public and private sectors, as Council Member Friedson and Council Member Rima mentioned regarding the child care policies and the impact those policies have on families and providers as well. So these are the conversations that we need to continue to have regarding moving from a response, solely providing a response to mitigate and suppress further transmission and reproduction of that virus in the community, to where we are in an endemic state, knowing that we may have future variants or sublineages on the horizon, but how do we continue to function mentally, physically, as well as from an operational standpoint? So those are my immediate thoughts in listening to you this morning.
Yeah, I think in short, I think, and Dr. Bridges went over a lot of metrics that I think are very helpful. I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to impact on populations, right? So we've heard Councilmember Rice's story about his mother, and it was very poignant to understand that unchecked transmission results in unchecked hospitalization, and unchecked hospitalization results in serious health impacts for people with COVID and people without COVID. And so I think as we move into an endemic state, it becomes more about understanding the impacts on people. Case counting, obviously, we talked about this, becomes far less important. So you monitor cases as a bellwether for what you may see in hospitalizations, not because cases necessarily matter as much as they did when we first started counting them in 2020. So I think the big thing is starting to understand the impacts on systems that people rely on for their health, and the resultant impacts that will have on everyone's health and safety. And so as we learn to live with the pandemic, and I think Councilmember Reamer was getting to this point, is part of and I know he was referencing Dr. Jha's tweet from last night, which I think is exactly right, which is that we need to treat our mitigation measures like it when it's raining, right? If it's pouring rain, You want to put on you put on your umbrella, your rain boots, your raincoat, etc. But when the rain stops, you may still carry the umbrella because you know it may rain again, but you're not wearing all those other measures, and you want to be able to operate reasonably. I think it's a good analogy because I think it just definitely reflects the fact that as we get into this endemic state of the virus, we need to still remember that we have to have a system that is ready to respond to future surges. I think that it's been said by multiple people. I think we're very likely to see a future surge of some kind in this, certainly during next winter. It is a seasonal respiratory illness period for a reason. And so we need to think about, I'm not saying we'll need to mask again next winter. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we need to, in order to keep good faith with our residents, need to roll back measures when it's appropriate to roll back measures, and to remind them that these measures don't burn your mask supply on May 1st because there hasn't been a wave in the last month or two. That's not what we certainly wouldn't recommend, that because we do not know what post-Thanksgiving next year will look like, what the end of the year holidays will look like. So it's really about understanding impacts on systems at the end of the day. And as we see those system level impacts, hospitalizations go down to a reasonable level, we can reasonably move forward and not have the same mitigation measures, open our libraries on Sundays, all the things that we all know we want to do. But remind our communities that just because we are doing these things doesn't mean we will never have to do any of them ever again. We don't want to, but I think we need to be able to have that credibility to be able to do those actions if necessary.
I appreciate very much that response. I think that your response to me is indicative of the next sort of task for all of us vis-a-vis communication. And we hear a lot from, constituents that are very engaged and are very well versed on a lot of these issues. We don't hear a lot from, I would say, the vast majority of the residents of the county, especially those who are perhaps low income, or maybe are non-English dominant, or maybe are just so busy trying to make ends meet. And so it is going to be critical that we are able to illustrate and communicate this sort of new state of being, so that if there's ever a increase, a surge of some type, we don't find ourselves in this constant, chaotic state where people don't seem to understand what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it, et cetera. And so, again, I think it speaks to this need to begin to put on paper these kinds of protocols for what we will anticipate will be a next sort of stage of this experience. And never forget the fact, again, that we have a very large proportion of our population who are not, watching this or paying attention to all of this, but are definitely impacted by all the decisions that are made, both by us, but also by not having access to information and not being able to respond. I mean, earlier, Councilmember Rice asked about the demographic profile of the Omicron and who was, affected. This is still an issue with equity. And of course, I know that there are these, rooted historical disparities, but it is kind of, concerning because we worked so hard to close the vaccination gap in those communities. And if we are still seeing very high cases, then we know that we have to double down, triple down on that information and how to best, address and serve those communities too. So again, I know, trust me, that this has not been easy at all. I struggle sometimes when I'm asked to speak, for example, to the Latino community in Spanish language media or something like that, to really put forth all these concepts and the things that we're talking about here and culturally translate that into a community who is very, very predominant in our county. I mean, Latino students are the highest number of students in MCPS, for example. So, so important for us to, again, think very deeply about how we're crafting this new messaging and how will we then make sure that everybody can hopefully get on the same page. I know it's hard, but at least that we can continue to work together But again, I do want to say thank you because I know how stressful it's been for everybody, for our residents, for all of you. But it seems like this is a bit of good news that there seems to be a trend of things improving. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. And just on the record, I totally concur with your recommendation at the beginning of your comments. We now have Councilmember Hucker, followed by Councilmember Jawando, then Council Vice President Glass. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I concur as well. Thanks, so much to the whole team at both HHS and MCPS. We never have enough good news in this business, so grateful for your hard work, especially when we do. Many of my questions have been asked, but I have a few left. Jimmy, great to see the progress on substitute teachers and to hear about the coverage of the bus routes. In every environment, it's tough to get accurate data. Do you feel like you're pretty confident in the info you're getting? I just wanted to pass on that even this morning, some students are texting my team right now saying their routes were missed or the bus showed up like 20, 25 minutes late. Should we pass those on to you directly? And is that a surprise at all?
Thank you, Councilmember Hucker. If there are individual circumstances, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at any point, and then I can follow up and get more information. There were no bus routes that did not have drivers this morning. On a regular basis, there are occasionally bus routes that are delayed for various reasons. Obviously, with the traffic mess on the Beltway this morning, I know that definitely impacted a lot of commuters, and I'm sure some bus routes were delayed because of that as well. But if there are individual circumstances, if you share those with me, I'll be more than happy to follow up.
You bet. Yeah, fair enough. Thanks. Some also pointed out that their routes were combined with other routes. So while that probably makes sense right now, and you want to get everybody to school, that's part of the solution you've been using, right, to get to this point where none of the drivers missed out. How many routes does that affect, assuming that's true, and how long do you think that'll continue?
I don't have the specific numbers on how the modifications were made. At the end of the day, the number of bus drivers available has increased significantly over the course of the month as the COVID-19 numbers have gone down. But I can get the specific numbers for you in terms of any route combinations.
Thanks. And do you know how many teachers and staff are getting tested at schools? We've heard from about teachers being told by testers at individual schools that they're only making tests available to students and that teachers were turned away. Is that the policy? And why would that be happening?
For the asymptomatic screening testing, that should not be the case. And if there is a situation where that is occurring again, if you or someone from your staff lets me know, we're definitely more than happy to follow up, because we have communicated with the testing vendor that has been servicing the large majority of our schools, Scion, to make sure that staff could be included as well.
Okay, great. That's what I thought. And then also, you may have mentioned this, but we've heard anecdotally about younger students in elementary schools receiving the wrong size masks, Sligo Creek Elementary in particular, but I think there are others. Do you know how that's being tracked or addressed?
So our operations team has been handling the ordering and then the distribution of masks. The child size mask I know were delayed due to some shipping delays. And so I'm guessing, but again, can follow up specifically, I'm guessing that a school may have given out the masks that were designed for older students to the younger students because they did not have the ones for the younger students just yet. But again, with individual circumstances, I'm always happy to follow up and get more information.
Sure. Okay. Appreciate all the answers. Thanks for all your hard work. It's great to see this progress. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to our folks on the front lines. We appreciate all you're doing. And happy Lunar New Year and happy Black History Month. I have really happy, I'll just say this because as the one who initiated the letter that all my colleagues signed to ask the state about the opt-in, opt-out testing, wasn't thrilled with the response but at least we got a different answer and allows us to move forward. So a response is always good in that regard. And I'm glad to hear, Mr. DeAndrea, that your team is looking into that. I want to thank Stephanie Williams, your general counsel, and the superintendent, and you. I know you've been working on this since they got that response, and we're eager to hear how to move forward and to support how you can move forward, because I think that'll have make a big difference in our ability to isolate when people are infected, keep kids in school more, get people back quicker, all the things that we want, so kids can and teachers and educators and everyone can be safe. So really happy to hear that. Look forward to hearing more. My question is to our health team, just following on, I think, the line of questioning that Councilmember Rice and Councilmember Navarro mentioned on our disparities. We were all very disheartened. We were on the front lines pushing, seems like an eternity ago, but just to try to get demographic data at the beginning of the pandemic. Then that stopped for a period, right? And then now my understanding is it started back up. So that's my first question, just to confirm that. And then are you going to be reporting, or can we report? Can you tell us what the breakdown is between Black adults and children and other versus other demographics, adults and children? And there was a large gap. I remember a large percentage gap of that when we had that information. It was almost 20 points. And if, back when I think the last time I saw it, are we tracking that? Do we have the ability to? Do we getting that information from the state so that we can hone in on the communities in a very, very targeted way? And as we are in this good news stage of overall rates going down.
Yes, Councilmember Jawando. Let me just share my screen. This is from last week's Pulse report. And we should have updated information by tomorrow as well. First, to your point of children, we have we are still tracking by racial and ethnic backgrounds. Early on, when we were presenting this data, we saw very significant differences between our Black and African American populations and our Hispanic populations versus our white and Asian populations. Those disparities have begun to close over the last few weeks. We're now within 5 percentage points of what our population distribution would expect for our Black and African American populations, and within 7 with our Hispanic populations. So we are continuing to make headway within those groups. As you can see, we are also tracking geographically. There is less disparity geographically than we've seen in previous rollouts, but this is still, to some degree, it's been the timing of our populations coming out to get vaccinated. This is why we've continued to make an emphasis working with MCPS on our Title I schools and doing not only first and second doses for 5 to 11-year-olds, but also offering 12 and up vaccines when we go out to those schools, so that we can capture more and more of the older age students as well as their parents who are due for boosters or are just now deciding to get first and second doses. We in fact got a recent email from one of our principals at New Hampshire Estates. This came in, I believe, yesterday, where he shared that a first grade student had tested positive. All of the students in that class were considered close contacts. And that would mean, and the unvaccinated students would need to quarantine. Up till now, that's meant that most of the classes at the school have had to move online when they've had that experience. If there's a small number of vaccinated students, it was relayed that they would be coming into school, but they would, because the preponderance of students in the class are online, they're participating online in the classroom. He shared that in this class of 16 students, 10 of the students were fully vaccinated at this point. These were first graders, and they decided to do in-person learning for that classroom, which meant that those 10 students could continue to get in-person learning with their teacher, and that's making a huge difference to their class. He's very heartened that they're going to be able to do this with more and more classes as those vaccination rates go up. He pointed out that The demographics of this class are like the rest of his school. 13 of the students in the class are Latino. They don't have any white students in this classroom. One thing that he identified made a difference was that many of the students in that class participated in an after-school Excel Beyond the Bell elementary program, which made it more likely that they were available for when we ran a vaccination clinic after school. The parents would be showing up at that point, and those kids were more likely to get vaccinated. So we're going to continue to work with our MCPS schools, our Title I schools, to, again, try to keep increasing these vaccination rates, because it's clear it's making a difference in the education level. I know as we're talking here, the difference between an endemic versus a pandemic phase of this response. I certainly hope that nobody thinks that the name and calling something endemic means we're going to stop making efforts to make differences in people's lives. Unfortunately, HIV is endemic in our country. That doesn't mean we stop trying to change and make people's lives better and stop the spread. And certainly we're going to keep doing that with COVID because it has impacted so many people. But what we wanted to share, I wanted to share that data. We do have on the larger scale, as far as geographically and racial and ethnically, you can see some of those divides again opened up when we went to the 5 to 11, but over time, we're beginning to see those groups come out to get vaccinated. It just needs a consistent effort, not only by our HHS teams and our community partners like Care for Your Health, who's doing vaccinations in the schools as well, and all of our health initiative partners who are doing vaccinations out in the community, but our partners such as MCPS, which are helping to convince parents that this is the right thing to do, and it's making a difference in their learning level.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. I appreciate that. Very thorough answer with the data. And it's just a reminder, this is important that we do this as we have these updates, so we know, so we keep ourselves, as you all are doing, on track to close these disparities. And thank you for the robust policy analysis that just demonstrated the importance of wraparound services in community schools. We just had a robust conversation yesterday in the E&C committee about this. And, that was my neighborhood elementary school. I grew up in Quebec Terrace in New Hampshire State's in Oakview Elementary. And I know that community very well. And that was a great illustration of the type of wraparound services and investments in outreach and all of it coming together to impact student learning. And I appreciate the reference to the AIDS pandemic. We had World AIDS Day on December 1st, and I spoke and I brought up the startling statistic that last year, 90% of the AIDS cases in our county were Black women, 90%. Now, while the rates are going down overall, similar like with COVID, that's a startling disparity. And we always have to dig in these numbers and find out what's happening, where it's happening, why it's happening, and how we stop it. So appreciate your attention to this, as well as all my colleagues. And we stand ready to do as much as possible holistically to support these children and families to make sure we narrow those gaps. So thank you so much, and turn it back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. I was beaming as we were talking about Excel Beyond the Bell contributing to enhancing vaccination rates. I know many of my colleagues on this council have been working on that issue, me too, for a long time. All right, Council Vice President Glass, and then I do have a couple comments I'll make at the end and questions, but Council Vice President Glass, we're doing great on time, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. President. Based on this presentation, I remain hopefully optimistic. Over the last week or two, since we, passed the last health order, dictating when the next conversation about the masks will come back up, and seeing what's happening in other jurisdictions around the DC region and around the country, I've been reflecting on this moment. And I've been reading a lot about the 1918 flu pandemic and the lessons learned from that and how we can apply that moving forward. And we all know that there are a lot of similarities between the two century distant pandemics. A lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. People avoided large gatherings. people encouraged to wear face coverings. And then also notably, there was a lot of misinformation about the viruses and about the treatments. But as we look forward out of this situation, I appreciate the conversation, the holistic nature of this entire conversation this morning, so that we continue just to remain vigilant to build back in a more equitable manner and provide those wraparound services and make sure that we keep our eye on some of the systemic situations, problems, systems that we worked through, essentially. And so I don't have any questions. They've been asked. I appreciate the earlier questions by Councilmember Friedson and Reamer about the various daycare problems and the regulations there between CDC and the state. So thank you very much to my colleagues for asking that. But again, we just need to remain vigilant. I remain hopeful, and I appreciate everything that you all continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions by all colleagues. Just a couple of follow-ups. So I know that, and Councilmember Navarro in her suggestion that we keep this discussion going in future briefings, but in terms of, I know one of the lasting repercussions, particularly of Omicron, and really on top of what's happened this last year and a half, is staffing levels and critical frontline positions, particularly in public health. Dr. Stoddard, Dr. Bridgers, I know we've been having many conversations with our hospitals about where things currently stand with frontline positions. But as we catch our breath, as we begin to catch our breath from everything that's transpired these last few weeks, can you elaborate a little bit on where those conversations are with hospitals in terms of what their needs are? I know they've had to incur tremendous expense to be able to pay for traveling nurses to help supplement the staffing levels that have been at all-time lows. That's not sustainable. So could we just talk a little bit about that? Because it obviously continues to be connected to our overall public health response.
Yes, we are. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Stoddard.
I was going to say, we are meeting with the hospital CEOs on Friday morning. Actually, the county executive, I believe Dr. Kroll and myself will be there. I'm not sure Dr. Bridgers will be there as well. But there is a meeting on Friday to discuss exactly what you've brought up, Council President Albornoz, some of the ongoing needs the hospitals have endured. I do know we are coordinating as well with, I believe the Maryland Hospital Association has put in a request for some support to the state as well. So we're obviously coordinating, making sure that we support locally, but also this is an issue across the state. We want to make sure that we're synergizing that support, potential support with the rest of the state. And so we're obviously keenly aware that they've endured some truly unsustainable impacts. And we know that even once the Omicron surge leaves, there will be impacts on our healthcare institutions, hospitals, and down the healthcare system status. And so we're certainly, one of the big things we are looking at with part of our recovery framework, and I know you were part of the conversation we had last Wednesday, where it was very high level strategic, but as part of the underlying recovery framework, we are looking at resetting the apparatus. What are the things we need to do to recover from, to undo some of the harm that has been done to our healthcare system so that it's better able to support all the ongoing needs in the future. And so that is definitely a part of the conversation. We're meeting with the hospital CEOs on Friday to further that conversation, hear what their chief concerns are, what their potential ask may be. But certainly we are keenly aware of that as an issue point as well. Dr. Bridgers.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. Council President Albornoz, just a quick couple of bulleted points from our last Friday discussion. We did begin rescheduling weekly meetings with our hospital partners, not only to discuss some of the challenges that they've been experiencing, but the way forward. And so some of those points included ongoing lens on pediatric cases. Again, I've repeatedly said we haven't seen those cases, but we can't lose sight of those cases, especially for those under 5-year-olds who are not vaccinated, and some of the strategies around that, and why we're doing well and not seeing those cases as maybe some of the other neighboring jurisdictions have. Again, as you've indicated, and Dr. Stoddard just enumerated, the burden of of personnel challenges on our emergency departments as well as our urgent care settings. And yes, they've repeatedly indicated, and I'm sure it will be articulated on Friday in our discussion regarding the cost and doing a cost benefit analysis of the impact of traveling nurses in the interim as far as long gone, since they are a costly human resource. Then the use of antivirals. We've had FDA approved antivirals for COVID as another tool, preventative measure, but we haven't seen them in the county yet. And so how will that look with our partners, in our community, at our hospital levels, and our urgent care settings? And so we're looking at that. Dr. Stoddard indicated last week, I think it was CCI that actually had their first tranche or allocation of these antivirals, but we haven't seen them in the community. It was mentioned in December that they would be available, but we haven't seen that. So what's the slowdown? Is it at the manufacturer and federal level? Is that at the state level? So we're having these discussions as well so that we can make sure that we get this preventative measure in place. So those are some of the additional bullet points regarding personnel and what some of the challenges that the hospital systems are experiencing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. To my colleagues in MCPS, it is obviously fantastic news that the numbers are continuing to go down, that we're in a better position to catch our breath there as well. And not surprised to hear there continue to be challenges operationally for various circumstances. But I guess my general question is, I know that as we catch our breath, as is always the case, we always assess what worked, what didn't work. But can you talk a little bit about what that process will look like with this most recent, what's transpired over the last month, and how, and I really want to give a lot of credit to Councilmember Rice, Chair Rice, who I know has been active, as all of my colleagues on the council, but particularly the members of our Education and Culture Committee, trying to provide support. But it's been noted by Dr. McKnight that there have been some lessons learned in how we can apply those moving forward. God forbid there's another variant on the horizon, but we'd be naive to not think that there may be one. So if we could just talk a little bit about what the school system's process is in reviewing what's transpired and how we might report some of that publicly moving forward. Would that be done through Board of Education session? You've been terrific, particularly recently, in trying to, as best you can, be transparent. But I know a lot of questions loom, and a lot of questions, have been answered, but how do we make sure that continues moving forward?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, President Albornoz. And continuous improvement is really at the core of what we do as educators. And so when we think about, typically we're talking through the lens of looking at instruction and how we're working to continually improve outcomes in the classroom for all students. In this particular case, obviously, we're talking about what's occurred with COVID-19 and obviously the many challenges that has presented over the course of the pandemic. And so moving forward, we have already started the process of, evaluating what we did over the course of the past several weeks that worked well, what did not work as well, so that we are prepared if there are future surges that, come at us in the way that this one did with Omicron, where numbers dramatically increased in a very short period of time. I can give you one specific example of a lesson learned that we know moving forward is really critical. We knew that for winter break, there were a lot of discussions around it would be great if we had tests available to be able to provide to all students and staff before they returned. That was not something that was an option due to availability for MCPS or any other school system in Maryland at that particular time. So we've already made plans to make sure that we have tests available for spring break so that we do have that option available so that, when people are traveling, as is likely over spring break, we've got plans in place. So that's just one small piece of the overall puzzle, but we are definitely committed to using the information we've learned. We've started that process informally, and we'll be doing it more formally moving forward, and then be sharing out with the Board of Education. We're also happy to share, through County Council or Education and Culture Committee about, the processes that we are developing so that we are more prepared to be able to address any kind of surge like we experienced with Omicron.
I appreciate that. And related to that, I know that you all advertised the position within MCPS that would serve as a more direct liaison among the public health officials. I know that you had challenges in identifying somebody in the last round, and actually Council Vice President Glass elevated yesterday during a briefing with the press what had been shared with us last week which was that the county is having a hard time filling its permanent public health officer position, and at least one person ended up turning down the job in the end because of the very toxic environment that we're in right now and the concern of how that may have impacted their family, which is a terrible status for us to be in, and just speaks to the, it's just, that's awful to hear that. But just where do things stand with the recruitment of that position? And I know we redoubled our efforts, but it will be critical moving forward to have that position serve in that liaison position.
Absolutely. And we definitely agree how critical that role is. We did experience challenges when we first advertised the position. So we used a different approach the second time around, not only with our traditional ways of advertising, but also using a variety of medical job boards as well. And we extended the length of the posting. So we did get some additional candidates. We are in the screening process now and are optimistic that we will have a candidate identified sometime later this month. And we will definitely keep the council apprised of those efforts.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I guess finally, just reiterating that we obviously have made great strides. I guess, Dr. Stoddard, I know that we're going to work on, we've already requested the additional 1 million test kits, and we will be moving forward as we did previously, but even more so intentionally stockpiling both test kits, masks, all of that. Could you talk a little bit about that strategy now as we are starting to catch our breath, and whether you think you have enough resources on hand to be able to do that, or will that be something that is requested at some later date of the council to expand resources?
We're still assessing that. I don't expect there will be an ask of council. I think we have the resources because many of these obviously are being the test kits and other things will be FEMA reimbursable. Masks were already reimbursed, for example. So we will be restocking. I will only note, though, that one of the things we're being very intentional about, and I just raised this because we want to be clear to the public that we're doing this. Some of the test kits do have expiration dates. And so obviously when we think about our stockpiling timelines, we want to make sure that we're not overstocking on something that's going to expire and wasting taxpayer dollars. So I just want people, we are being cognizant of that. And obviously, you know, as we saw with the Omicron surge, some rapid test kits did not, their efficaciousness did not hold up with Omicron. And so obviously we may diversify a little bit of our stockpile. There is a new company, Maxim, centered in Montgomery County, that has just had an EUA approved for a rapid test kit. So we're looking to develop a contract there. So we have a local vendor that's capable of providing rapid test kits. That way, not only do we have a stockpile, but we have a local vendor who's able to resupply us on a regular basis. And so we're thinking about those strategies to make sure we have a diversity of capabilities and tools that aren't going to expire and that cover a potential, you know, if a variant is not sensitive to the eye health test kits that we're using in the future, then we'll have another test that may be more functional. So we're definitely looking at that as part of our normal emergency management process, where we're looking at what we utilized, and we will rebuild a stockpile that's appropriate for, you know, a period of time in the future. And so rapid test kits will surely be part of that, as N95s and other PPE were as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I think that wraps it up for our public health session today. I want to thank everyone for your diligence and hard work and dedication. Let's hope that the numbers continue to go down. We will have we will have 2 more public health sessions prior to the end of February recess and the end of the mask mandate on the 21st. But it's clear to me that as the continue to trend down, we are in a much better position than we were just a week ago. So thank you all very much for joining us. And colleagues, we're a few minutes ahead of schedule today, which is obviously great news, but we now move on to the third item on our agenda, which is an action. And this is to discuss the spending affordability guidelines for the FY23 capital budget and other assumptions in the recommended CIP by our county executive. I know our Government Operations Committee, led by Chairwoman Navarro, had a robust discussion regarding this issue recently, and I want to turn it over to her to provide an overview of that discussion, and then Mr. Smith to walk us through that packet. Ms. Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleagues on the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, Council Members Katz and Friedson, for the deliberation, as well as thank ONB, from the executive, and Mr. Smith for preparing, as always, a really great comprehensive packet. And so we did meet on January 27th to review the current economic and fiscal conditions as they relate to the capital budget spending affordability guidelines. Based on the review, the GO committee recommends that the full council retain the council approved bond guidelines from October 2021 because the economic and fiscal conditions, as evidenced by the county's debt capacity indicators, do not demonstrate sufficient improvement to warrant an increase in the guidelines at this time. As you recall, the council adopted the current guidelines in October of last year, only 3 months ago. During that discussion, the GO committee reinforced the decisions of the previous council to taper the county's borrowing guidelines. Please note that this recommendation to retain the guidelines does not impact FY23 and FY24, the two most constrained years of the CIP. We believe that the county would benefit from additional time to learn more about how formulas for state aid and information about the federal infrastructure bill recently passed will impact the county's CIP. The state has a significant budget surplus, and the counties are waiting to see how the General Assembly will direct these unexpected resources. President Biden also signed the infrastructure bill late last year, and these resources will benefit our state and counties for years to come. As noted in the council staff report, the review of conditions is not about the amount of need in our capital budget, but it is about affordability. Has the county's economic or fiscal conditions changed enough to revise the adopted guidelines? As chair of the GO committee, I acknowledge that there is great need in our county, both for important infrastructure and for critical programs and services. The council is also responsible for managing the county's fiscal policies to ensure that the county is in a strong position to continue to provide these necessary items. Carefully managing the county's debt expenditures is an important tool to ensure the county's operating budget has enough resources to address the residents' needs. As noted in the staff report, the decision to hold firm on an approach to taper the guidelines is having a positive impact on our debt indicators. It is also clear that more time is needed to reach our policy thresholds. During the committee's discussion, ONB noted how the executive's recommended guidelines compared to the October 2021 assumptions. The committee discussed this information and determined, as already shared, that retaining the council's approved guidelines is the best approach for this year. The specific indicator noted by Ms. Beck is still significantly greater than the policy level. And as noted in the council staff report, the improvement in the county's estimated revenues did not materially change the need to taper the county's overall debt. Lastly, the committee also discussed the fact that the next council will have an opportunity to review the current conditions again in January of 2023. The council can then determine whether to retain the adopted guidelines or revise them because the conditions have significantly changed. I will now ask Mr. Smith, our legislative analyst, for any comments beyond what I've said before we take action. I also would like for Mr. Smith to clarify some comments that were made by Ms. Beck during our Education and Culture Committee yesterday regarding the executive's proposal as it relates to prevailing wage as well, because I think there needs to be some clarification there regarding those comments versus what we discussed in the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. So I will turn it over to Mr. Smith. And again, the GO committee is recommending that we stay the course and continue to be disciplined in that approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Navarro. And I will not relitigate the entire conversation at the GO committee. I'll also note that we're joined by Mr. Morgan, who's a part of with Parks. And as part of this process, the GO committee also made a recommendation to retain the park bond guidelines that set in October of 2021. To your question, Ms. Navarro, there was a discussion, or I received some questions related to the prevailing wage PDF that the executive recommended and how some of the new bonds or most of the new bonds that were recommended in this budget went towards that prevailing wage. Council staff just wants to note that the council's decision today is about setting a chalk line, I believe is what I heard for the bond guidelines. It is not related to a specific project. and including in the specific PDF in question, programs a significant number of bonds, about 14 million in the first 2 fiscal years, which is not any different in terms of the council approved bond guidelines, as well as the county executives recommended by bond guidelines. And so council staff just urges the council to look at this decision as the overall CIP pie, the resources available, and not any specific projects right now. As noted during the GEO committee's discussion, also as related to other assumptions, including federal and state aid, the council's committees, as always, will go through each of the individual projects and make recommendations. And those individual recommendations will then be pieced together with council staff and the council's recommendations to see how the whole pie fits together. And so, again, as noted by Ms. Navarro, today's decision is kind of setting a standard of what the total pie will be for bond guidelines. It's only a percentage of the total CIP. And as noted, the council will again come back to these guidelines in January of 2023 to see if the economic and fiscal conditions have changed, to increase them, decrease them, or hold them steady. So I will not go through the full packet again, Mr. President, given the time, because I believe Ms. Navarro hit all the high points, but I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Navarro, and thank you, Mr. Smith. I don't see any questions from colleagues. I'll just reiterate briefly, we've been talking, this council has been firm since the beginning about ensuring that we ensure that we are held responsible for the fiscal security of our county and our community. We know we've obviously been in the pandemic for the last 2 years. Things have been moving targets. It's hard to know exactly what to foresee ahead, and we must remain cautious and vigilant so we don't repeat some of the mistakes of previous generations when times were good, checks were written that then later couldn't really be cashed as well as they needed to be. And so therefore reductions had to be made. So I really appreciate the great work of our GEO committee, very much concur with their recommendations. I do see, I see that Ms. Beck has her hand up. So Ms. Beck, please go ahead.
Just one thing, if it was mentioned as the prevailing wage PDF, I just want to clarify that's not the PDF I meant to be referring to. It was the Built to Learn state aid match, which did not have funding until FY 25 through 28. But I understand what you're saying regarding SAG is about affordability. So.
Thank you for that clarification. And I do have 2 hands from colleagues. We have Councilmember Friedson, followed by Council Vice President Glass. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Chair Navarro and Councilmember Katz, Mr. Smith, Ms. Beck, and everybody who worked on this. We had a robust discussion. I won't relitigate it. I was probably responsible for a good portion of the time of that discussion. I'll just reiterate one point that I made at a high level that I feel strongly about and that Chair Navarro noted. But, I grew up and learned from my mother that you always should leave the house better than you found it. And we benefited on this council and this county benefited from decisions that were made prior to this pandemic that put us in a much stronger financial position. And the premise behind the committee's recommendation in many ways is really to ensure that the next council has the same ability to be put in a better position than what they otherwise would be put in from a fiscal standpoint. And this allows us to leave the next council, of which I hope several of us are part of, in a better position than the council that we adopted. And I think that is our charge and that is our responsibility and our obligation. And I think that the committee's recommendation reflects that. So I just wanted to note that and appreciate all of the work that has gone into this and appreciate all of the work prior to this decision, prior to this council, frankly, that has gone into putting the county in as strong a fiscal position as it has, which has allowed us to weather this storm a lot better than we otherwise would have with this pandemic and the financial and economic challenges that it has resulted in. So thank you for that, and yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. We've got Council Vice President Glass, followed by Councilmember Reamer, and then Chair Navarro would like to speak again. Council Vice President Glass.
Sure. Thank you very much. I too want to extend my appreciation to Chair Navarro and members of the GEO committee. I do support their recommendation so that we can, make sure that the county meets its fiscal policy goals. But I do have a question just about as we look down the road and the inflation rate continues to increase and is a little unnerving as we do long-term planning. And so what is the relationship between the interest rate, the high interest rate now, the evolving interest rate in the future, and what does this decision mean as it relates to that? Mr. Smith or Ms. Beck?
Sure. And also we'll turn to OMB if anything needs to be clarified. The inflation rate is included in the CIP assumptions as it helps to understand some of how cost will increase for certain projects as a whole. In later years of the CIP, council staff notes that they used the current estimates from October. In the council staff report, I had updated those estimates based on what finance provided. And so most of the inflation increase is in fiscal 22 and a little bit in fiscal 23. Finance currently estimates that inflation will return to a more normal level around 2% for the later years. And so that is about the same of what we've been expecting. And then we'll just talk about the time value of money. Obviously, as the later years come, if inflation continues to be high, the value of a dollar today will be less in 6 years if we have the same dollar there. And so the council will need to consider that. I'll also add that typically when inflation is high, county revenues increase. And so one of our debt service indicators accounts for that. And even though in the increased revenues that the county has estimated for fiscal 23 and beyond, that did not reduce our indicator enough to the policy threshold as discussed on staff report. So thank you.
No, so I appreciate that. And so I did see the packet and I saw the inflationary numbers were included, right? But my question inartfully asked at the beginning, given the wildly unpredictable swings, right? That is more the heart of what I'm asking and how we accommodate for that.
So can I just add one thing? We did increase the set aside in FY23 and FY24 as a modest measure to try to address that, but it was not an extreme. I didn't feel it was wise to pull a lot of money out of other previously programmed projects to hold it in case we needed it. So if there was rampant inflation, we probably would have to rejigger some projects. But maybe there'll be some more state money. I don't know, but we have taken some modest efforts in 23 and 24 to try to mitigate some of that.
And I that satisfies my question. And as Chair Navarro stated in her introductory comments, with federal support and state support and the ability for this body next year to reevaluate depending on the information in the marketplace or in the economy, I think that all sets us up nicely. And again, I appreciate the chair and the GO's work on this and all of yours as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Councilmember Reamer, followed by Chair Navarro, and then Councilmember Katz. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank our chair, Councilmember Navarro, and the committee for this recommendation. Council President Albornoz, I think you said the decisions of previous generations. It's not really appreciated how long it takes to work out of the kind of capital binge that was put in place 20 years ago. And really, that's what we're still working our way through. We've been more restrained in recent years, but to your point, it wasn't a given that this council would necessarily adopt that. Every new council is a new group of people. But I think with strong leadership coming out of the GO committee, I think we've been staying on track, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you to everybody for doing this. It's sort of a thankless task that will help everyone, in coming years. But, anyway, thanks.
Chair Navarro, that was a good tee up there.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer, for saying that. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that I believe this will be my last spending affordability guideline, at least for the CIP. We still have operating budget, but I did want to make a couple of comments as in just reflecting on what this all means. No doubt that when I joined the council in 2009, very excited and ready to go, was confronted with cuts, savings plans, cuts, and it just was just relentless. And the decisions that we had to make then were so sobering. And I have to say that it was, like trial by fire as I was starting to then chair this committee. But I was always so extraordinarily impressed by the amazing talent of our finance department, OMB, the combination of these teams in really working with our council. And as a matter of fact, Steve Farber, our previous staff director, really working collaboratively to make sure that the decisions that we were all making made sense, that they, even though they were painful and we did everything we could to buffer the impact, really were responsible for the fact that this county was able to retain its fiscal stability. And as Council Member Reamer said, it's a thankless job because there's a type of thing that we don't talk too much about, but council members came together, everybody held hand, and we understood the assignment, as my daughter likes to say a lot. And it really did make a difference. And so I just want to say that, as I'm exiting out, I never thought I would become like a fiscal, geek, but this is so important. I mean, this notion of the debt service is so critical as it affects our ability to have resources for our operating budget. It is so important to know that, having the AAA bond rating, I know there's a lot of talk about whether that even matters. It does matter. Having a reserve that we know is there for incredible emergencies, it does matter. We've seen how it has impacted our ability to do what we need to do during this pandemic. And this is different though, and we also need to recognize that. This crisis is different because we have had, under the previous administration in the White House, there's been recognition of the need for local governments to have the necessary resources to mitigate. That has been different. And so we should not just think that because we have all of these additional resources that it's like time to just go, and have another party with all of this. So just wanted to say that because I know there would be a new council next year looking at these, guidelines. And I think collectively as a body, really being disciplined will make a big difference as we try to address, the affordability of all of these projects. So thank you for indulging me because it's just been a really interesting ride, but I think necessary. And hopefully, as somebody who lives in this county, of course, I want to make sure that that we are in good standing fiscally and in the strongest position possible going forward. Thank you. And Councilmember Friedson, I love that that comment that you made about leaving the house, how you found it. I did say that to my daughter who did leave. One of them just left. So, they came to be with me during the pandemic and I kept saying, you need to leave the house the way you found it. So I keep reminding my young adults, the Councilmember Friedson said that, who's not that much older than they are. So thank you.
Amen. And I'm a proud fiscal geek too. So Councilmember Katz, followed by Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Friedson's not going to be liked by your daughter, and he didn't even say it to her directly. So that's the thanks in this whole thing. But I too want to take that moment to thank everybody, especially you, Chair Navarro, and Councilmember Friedson, and Mr. Smith. And I want to thank Ms. Beck as well for her thoughts. This is not something that many people really, they should pay attention to it, but it's not that interesting at times to figure out, well, isn't it wonderful we're getting a AAA bond rating? Well, the reality is that it is wonderful that we're getting a AAA bond rating. And I come back, and you mentioned Mr. Farber, and I want to mention Ms. Michelson and thank her and everyone else associated doing this. This is not done, as I like to say, by magic wands, I can tell you. But when I first came to the council two elections ago, I came from a place where there was no debt. And I, myself in my own business, debt was something that it was just something you didn't talk about. It was just like a horrible word. And I came here and I realized that if the debt were a department, it would be the third largest department that Montgomery County has. And that just scared me to no end. And I have to tell you, and I was on government operations last time, but I have to tell you that all of us that were on government operations, obviously Chair Navarro was there as well. And Councilmember Reamer, I believe you were sitting there and on government operations at that time as well. But I have to tell you that all of us and the entire council realized that we were heading in a direction that we should not be heading in. And it's not easy. It's not quick. And it's like everybody's talking about what their mother said. My mother used to say that medicine is good for you, but if you take it all at once, it'll kill you. And that's the same thing here. We needed to, with caution, start to reduce the debt and continue to do the very necessary things that we needed to do with that debt was paying for. So we've done it. We're doing it. We're not done yet. I can tell you, we're doing it. And I think that I want to very publicly thank everyone for working together to get us to this place, because it's not easy, but it's right. Thank you very much. I turn back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Moms are getting a lot of love. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the medicine with the appropriate doses, that's a good one too. So appreciate that, and certainly applicable to this. I just two quick final points here. Number one, thank you again to Chair Navarro when I talked about the prior councils and the position that we started in. It's in many ways thanks to your leadership as GO chair. So thank you for that. And to Council Vice President Glass's comments, I just wanted to highlight here, because I think they're really important points. The debt capacity indicators that we talked about, as Mr. Smith noted, the revenues are up when inflation is up generally, because spending is up. It's one of the reasons why inflation is up. And so as we look to review that, obviously we'll have to continue to analyze how it all works. I think that the decisions made here largely by the executive branch that we approved, including the set aside, which is basically the reserve account in the capital budget, and the inflation decisions were prudent, but we'll have to continue to analyze that. But I wanted to highlight, because we've talked a lot about prior decisions of the council, but in that regard, it's the decision of the voters to change the property tax system that we have very wisely and overwhelmingly, which will put us in a much stronger position now, and does put us in a stronger position related to these indicators, and will continue to do that. And so as inflation occurs and as spending patterns change and as prices change, we will be able to absorb that as part of the budget in a normal, healthy, functioning environment, because we have a normal, healthy, functioning property tax system, thanks to the voters that overwhelmingly approve that. And in addition to that, impact taxes are up, recordation taxes are up, and while we are in an unusually high environment for inflation, we're also in a higher than expected environment for some of these key revenues, in addition to the fact that we've changed the system that we capture revenue overall in order to make sure that we are in the healthiest position possible. So it's thanks to the prior councils, it's thanks to the prudent decisions of this council, and it's mostly thanks to the voters and the residents of Montgomery County that we're in the position that we are. And I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that, and appreciate everybody's collaborative work here, and look forward to moving this forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Well said. Well said by everyone. So speaking of moving this forward, we need a motion to Accept the spending affordability guidelines for the FY23 capital budget as recommended unanimously by our Government Operations Committee. Can I get a motion?
Excuse me, there's a Geo Committee recommendation, so you can just
Yeah.
vote.
Got it. So we can just vote. Thank you. Get in the hang of this. All those in favor, please raise your hands of the Geo Committee's vote. That's unanimous. So thank you all for that terrific work and great comments. We now move on to our consent calendar. Can I get a motion to approve our consent calendar, please?
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Rice, seconded by Councilmember Katz. Any discussion regarding the consent calendar? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hands. That is once again unanimous. That moves on to our final item before recess, which is a closed session. I will need a motion to meet in closed session pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3305B10, to discuss public security. Topic is security of public water supply infrastructure. Can I please get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Hucker. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that once again is unanimous. Colleagues, we will now adjourn to our closed session and then recess. Thank you.